Okay, there we go. I can hear you.
Hi. I have my newborn right next to me, so I'm hoping he doesn't start crying.
Okay, that's fine. Before we get started, just want to let you know it's on like the consultation form and everything, but we do record all of our consultations just so that way you can look back at them if you need any information from it.
Okay. Okay.
But other than that, we can go ahead and get started. So what's been going on with Ricciardo?
So we have a baby, and he's also at that lovely 10-month age where he's sort of starting to ignore everything we've taught him. So there's a few things that I think have stood out. I have a list. The one is he doesn't really listen to down. So he'll jump on the counter and he kind of counter surfs and he won't necessarily get down, and he likes to jump on visitors, and when we're on walks he's trying to say hi to every person we pass. So down's a big one. He pulls on the leash on walks, so I'd love to get him to the point where I can take both our newborn and him on a walk. Right now I can't walk the two of them together. He likes to steal our baby's toys and pacifiers. He thinks they're all for him.
Yeah.
And then we've been trying to teach him leave it around the baby. So like we'll let him kind of come up and give him a kiss. But at a certain point, you know, he has to like leave him alone, and he's okay with that. He's not great. And then he burrows in blankets, especially on the couch in our bed.
Okay.
Which I know is kind of their thing, but he doesn't really listen. So it's general sort of adolescence age, and now that we have a newborn, I feel like it's just kind of compounding it.
Yeah. That all sounds about right. So far, what have like you guys been doing to like try and handle him, or like how do you guys walk him, anything like that? Like what are you guys doing right now?
Yeah, so right now, like for the commands in the house, we're just trying to do treats. And when we got the baby home, we had to do a lot of treats because he was kind of freaked out at first. And he's been really good with Noah, which has been good. It's just he's not really listening. So the good thing is now, like when the baby cries, he doesn't freak out and he's good around him. It's just kind of getting into that next level where unless I'm literally holding a treat, he just kind of ignores me.
Okay. Yeah. And then on the walks, do you guys use like a normal clip leash and flat collar harness?
We use a harness, so it kind of like wraps around his shoulders and his belly, and then a regular leash.
Okay. So right off the bat, for the walking, him being on a harness, it kind of makes sense that he would want to pull a little bit more, because what'll happen is like, yes, harnesses are nice for the dog's throat and everything like that, and it's a little more gentle on them. But at the same time, since you're pulling back on the harness to try and get him to stop pulling, dogs have this thing called opposition reflex. So as you're pulling back, it's making them want to pull forward more. And since it's around their chest area right there where they have the most power, they're going to kind of dominate the walk a little bit better than if they were maybe on something else for a walk. Or for example, a normal flat collar, and then like if you guys end up doing like e-collar or anything like that, that's going to help with the pulling just a little bit more even before like any training.
Okay. So maybe switch to just we do have a neck collar.
Yeah, you could use that. Pretty much anything other than the harness is going to give you a little bit more leverage in like a pulling scenario.
Okay.
But that's usually a common kind of mistake that people will assume with the harness, you have like better control. It just ends up making them want to pull more. So then you're kind of adding to the problem a little bit.
Okay.
And then with the food stuff, what you're saying, you know, makes sense and sounds right, where sometimes the treat's just not enough to get him to want to follow through with whatever you're trying to get him to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the natural ceiling with doing the food stuff and like the positive reinforcement and everything like that. So there's nothing specifically wrong with him there. That's pretty much any dog will do that. As soon as there's something more rewarding, they're just going to go for the higher reward. And especially now that there's all these things going on, all these new distractions and the baby and everything, like the food is just not worth it enough to him for him to want to follow through with whatever command is happening. And then another issue with doing the food stuff is that it's really good to reward him, to tell him yes, but then we don't really have a way to kind of tell him no, other than saying no or something like that, because we can't just do that with the treats. So all that kind of all makes sense, and it's not really out of the ordinary for any dog that's just been doing the positive reinforcement with the treats or walking on a harness. And then what are your goals with him, like overall? Like what do you see yourself looking like after training?
I would love to be able to kind of trust him more around the baby. The other is to just be able to give a command and him actually listen to me, whether I have a treat or not. And then walking would be a big one. Like if he'd walk on my side and not jump on people.
Okay. Yeah. So just some general obedience, kind of having some manners, and then like having like a nice walk.
Yes, exactly. Nothing crazy. He has a great temperament. He's not aggressive. He's not. So, I mean, that part of it, I think we're very lucky because it's really just getting him to listen to us.
Yeah. He's pretty good here and everything, just very calm. And it's with us, we haven't really experienced any like major behavioral stuff or anything. So it just sounds like mainly obedience.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you know about the e-collar starting off?
Well, my husband's a little reluctant starting off. So I said I'd get all the download today and then we'd talk about it. He's worried. I think he's read a little bit that it can kind of change the temperament of the dog, and sometimes he's kind of aggressive. And I think one thing is just we love the part of temperament, so we just don't want anything to change that. And then the other one is he's kind of read that you have to then use it for life, because if you stop using it, they kind of go back to pre-e-collar ways.
Okay. Yeah, so those are two common areas where owners kind of have their nervousness about the e-collar. So nothing out of the ordinary there. For the first thing you said was about you don't want it to like change his temperament or his like personality or anything like that. So for the e-collar, we've never seen it cause any psychological or like physical harm, because what it is it's not sending any electricity to the dog. It's not doing anything crazy like that. Have you ever been to a physical therapist? Okay. Do you know the TENS unit, the muscle stimulation thing that they stick on you and they do that? That's the same technology and same sensation as what the e-collar does. So we're basically stimulating where it's touching. It'll be like a muscle like around his neck here. And then we can control how intense we make it with our e-collars, because we have 127 levels. So we have all these different numbers to find what's going to work best for Ricciardo and what's too much, what's too little, and where he's going to listen. So all we're basically doing is trying to find the number that's uncomfortable enough to him for him to think, okay, if I want to avoid the e-collar, I'm just going to follow through with the command. But we don't need to just make it 127 or something crazy like that. Just whatever's going to work for him to where he's like, all right, I'll go along with it. And then that being said, any type of personality or behavior stuff that we may see when we start doing the training with the e-collar is whatever his personality like already is. So we're not going to make him more anxious. We're not going to make him like aggressive. We're not going to do any of that. You can't really do that with like an adult dog with the e-collar, just because the way that we do it, we don't try and put them through scenarios where we see that they're confused, we see that they're under too much pressure. We kind of work with the dog. So whatever Ricciardo is showing us and however he's going along with the commands is how we're going to address the e-collar to his specific, I guess, like level and his specific areas of improvement and anything like that. Okay. And then also along with that, his personality isn't going to change at all. The only thing that you might see is that he may be a little bit more obedient if the e-collar's on. So that kind of leads into the second thing where you don't want the collar on all the time. That's very reasonable. Personally, for my dog, I don't really have the collar on him too much, just because what we find is that when you're consistent with the e-collar on the dog, it starts to give you a little bit more consistency once the e-collar is off as well. So like in the home, if you don't need like that perfect off-leash recall, like while you guys are just sitting there watching TV, he doesn't need the e-collar on, and he should still be understanding the things he can do, the things he can't, because we'll be addressing it with the e-collar. So for example, any behaviors that are unwanted by him, we wouldn't necessarily tie a command to that. So like, let's say you don't ever want him like nipping or something at the baby. Then we would correct that with the e-collar. We would not tie a command to it. So then he's learning under no circumstances are you to nip at the baby. And then whether the e-collar's on or off, as long as you're being consistent with it when you're at like the beginning of the training and kind of clarifying everything to him, it should have some carryover to where he's understanding like, all right, I just never nip at the baby now. Oh, so the way that, yeah. Do you have any questions about that so far?
No, that makes sense. So what would you, I guess, what behaviors do you tie a command to versus
not? So what we would do is it's kind of based on what you're looking for. So a good example of this is, does he have any issues like barking in the home?
He'll bark only if he's in his crate, which is out in our living room in front of our couch, and we're sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
He'll bark like, what the heck, guys? Why are you sitting in front of me and not letting me out? Okay. But otherwise, he's not a barker.
Okay. So sometimes people like the barking for security at certain points, just so that way, you know, if a stranger comes to the door, their dog barks a little bit, it just makes them have that kind of safety net a little bit more.
Yeah.
So for something like that, we would tie a command to it because we don't want the dog to completely stop barking. We just want them to stop barking once we tell them like some type of command, like stop or enough or quiet.
Oh, got it.
But let's say somebody lives in a place, like an apartment, where they can't have any barking at all, or else they're going to get in trouble. And like they don't care about the security. They just want their dog to not bark at all. Then we would correct that with the e-collar, but not say anything. So that way we don't have to say something to make it stop. He just learns, okay, I'm not to bark in this house. And that's how we kind of differentiate. So it's just really based on what you want. So for example, for the jumping or anything like that, like if you never want him jumping on the counter, then you would just correct it without saying anything. So that way he's just learning. There's no warning. There's no specific command. I'm just not to jump on the counter.
Yeah.
And then as long as you're consistent with all of that, kind of what we will see happen is that it's so ingrained in his head that he's not supposed to jump on the counter, that regardless if the e-collar's on or off, he's going to have that like second thought of like, I don't know if I want to jump on the counter. And then we also have ways of incorporating other types of corrections separate from the e-collar. So that way you guys don't feel like you just have to have the e-collar on all the time and are over reliant on it. So in that scenario, we could suggest something like a bonker. And I don't know if you've ever heard of those or ever used one. It's basically a rolled up something soft. So here we use like bath towels and we roll it up and then tie it off. And it's very soft, so we're not doing it to like cause any harm. It's just that confrontation of us going up and bopping the dog on the head with it is enough for them to understand, like, okay, I'm not going to do that. Like, that was a lot of confrontation.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So that way you still have that presence of like a disciplinary figure, and you're able to still make things happen even without the e-collar. So he still has some level of respect for you, regardless if the e-collar's on or off.
Got it.
Yeah.
How long does it usually take, I guess, once you work on a command, let's say, with the e-collar, for them to get to that point where they're doing it regardless of whether they have it on or off?
It depends on how consistent you are with it and how much he really wants to do it. So if he doesn't really care about it too much, and like we may address it like 2 or 3 times, and then he's like, whatever, I don't want to jump on the counter anymore. And like we could see it happen like pretty quickly, or he could be more like, I really like to jump on the counter. So then we may have to be consistent with it, like whenever he's going to go by the counter. So like that's where something we would suggest, let's say Ricciardo's going over by the counter, he's looking up at the counter, you see him kind of getting ready, then we would just correct it right there, because we're like, all right, we know he's about to jump on the counter.
Yeah.
And if he's still having issues with that, then we may be more strict on it, to where we're telling him, okay, you can't go around the counter now. So then we kind of make like a barrier for him, like you're not to go by the counter. So that way we don't even have to worry about you going in that direction.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So it depends on him. And it depends on how much he wants to go on the counter. But staying consistent with it right off the bat is going to help it just be super clear and super smooth to him. Because once people start getting inconsistent with when they're letting the dog do things, when they're not, that's when the dog is going to start to get confused, because now there's this like gray area of like, well, sometimes I get to do it, sometimes I don't. Yeah. So then you're going to have a lot of confusion from Ricciardo, and he's not necessarily going to know what the rules are.
No, that makes sense. No, we're very good about like, if it's a no, it's a no. There's no, we've been around a lot of my in-laws have dogs, and they feed them and do all the things you're not supposed to do at the table and stuff. So we've learned like, no, we're never doing it. We're eating human food. How it goes.
Yeah, that's smart to avoid a lot of those issues where they're over begging and everything.
Yes.
But that's kind of how we would go about correcting a little bit of the in-home stuff. And then same idea for the jumping on people. If you just want him to not jump on people like at all, then you would just cut it outright. If you want it to happen sometimes, then we would have to like tie a word to it, or some type of verbal command, to where he's knowing like, okay, I can't do this right now. And then when you get permission, then he's allowed to go and do whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that'd be another one. Most of these seem like we just would never want to do it. So that's probably, I don't know if it's harder or easier, but.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Say it again.
Oh, I said most of these seem like something where we just never want him to do it. Like we don't ever want him on the counter. We don't want him jumping on people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes it a lot easier too sometimes, because now you're not having to worry about doing any extra commands or giving permission for certain things. It's just no words. You're just stopping the behavior. And that makes it pretty clear to the dog as well. So like I do the same thing with my dog, as far as like, if food's dropping on the ground, I don't say anything. It's just a correction if you go for it. And then now he's at the point where he's like, if food falls on the ground, I'm just going to ignore it.
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it kind of, it's the same idea for a lot of different things. If the rule of thumb is just like, if it's a behavior you don't want, then we can go ahead and just correct it, not say anything. And then as long as you're consistent with it, it should be something that carries over like in the long run.
Okay.
And then any other questions about those two specific concerns you had?
Well, no, I guess it just leads to, so I know your trainings are sort of a mix of, Elizabeth was saying at the park versus in home.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like most of what we're looking at is sort of in-home behaviors. The only sort of outdoor one is to run the walk. So I don't know if that changes how we would approach it.
Yeah. So it can be like a split like that, because realistically for the in-home stuff, most of the stuff that you're saying can be taken care of in 1 to 2 in-home sessions.
Okay.
just because it's a lot of it's going to depend on how you guys are doing the training. So that session for an in-home is just going to be like explaining what you would do, seeing the behaviors, showing you how to correct the behaviors, explaining any other questions you may have. And then it's kind of up to you guys to like do the rest of the training with him, and then do it like based off of that like in-home session. Okay. So if you're still having issues, obviously more in-home sessions can happen, but usually that's what we see, especially for common behaviors like this, like the jumping, just the general rules in the home. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward. It's just kind of, once you know how to do it, just adding that consistency, and then things should be pretty much taken care of, because he doesn't have any like aggression issues or anything like that. Right. So that's something that would make it more complex, where maybe multiple in-home sessions would be needed. But pretty much whatever program that you end up going with, the in-home stuff should be able to be taken care of in like 1 to 2 sessions, because it's pretty common stuff. And then for the walking, that's something where, given the nice weather and everything, we would be going to the park, doing like heel. It takes 2 sessions for heel, and then recall, and then whatever other commands that you guys may be wanting. Okay. And then to briefly go over heel, because that's going to fix a lot of the stuff with the walking. Our heel is very strict. So ideally, once Ricciardo learns it, his right shoulder should be in line with your left leg the entire time while walking. If you slow to a stop, he should go into an auto sit, and then he's following those rules the entire time while you're walking until you release him. Yeah. So when we're introducing this command, since it is so strict, we find that a lot of the pulling, a lot of the being distracted by stuff, wanting to jump on people, all of that can kind of be taken care of indirectly by just doing this one command. Okay. So basically, the thought that's going on in Ricciardo's head is, I have all these rules to follow with heel. I have to focus. If I mess up, like the e-collar is happening, I need to make sure I'm doing good on my walk here. So then if he sees somebody come by, he's not to jump on them. And we're not telling him don't jump on them. We're just saying that you still have to follow heel. So to him, heel should be more worth it than jumping on this person, or than pulling ahead, or falling behind, or jumping on the baby stroller, anything like that. Yeah. So for all of that, we're just correcting for heel, but since it's so strict, it doesn't have like an opportunity to do any of that extra stuff. So it just makes it a lot more simple than correcting for each individual thing. It's just keeping him in heel, and then he's not supposed to do anything else. Okay. And then was he doing any other stuff outside, or was it just getting distracted and jumping on people?
It's just the jumping and the pulling.
Okay. Then yeah, pretty much heel should take care of all of that, because now you'll have something to correct for. So once you learn heel, all of that becomes like very easy to deal with, especially if you're going to be walking the baby. You don't want him kind of creating any tension on the leash. Yeah. So he should ideally just walk at your side, loose leash, any environment, you should be good to go.
We did get a leash. I don't know what you guys think about them. It's like, you can just hold it like a regular leash, or you can put it over your shoulder, like crossbody, or around your waist. Does heel work with that kind of leash too?
Yeah, so heel can work with anything. Okay. Because ideally, since our whole thing is to like move towards off-leash training, ideally there shouldn't be like any tension on the leash. So it should be loose. So it almost should be like there's not a leash there, but you'll still, of course, have that leash there just in case. Yeah. So pretty much whatever leash you're going to use, it doesn't really matter. The only thing I would probably say is that at the beginning of training, when he's still going to be making a lot of mistakes and you're going to need to be kind of fixing his positioning and all that, you may want to just stick with the normal flat collar short leash or clip leash, just because that's going to be the easiest to make the command happen if he's having any issues. If it's like across your body or you're using like a harness or something, it may be a little bit more difficult because the way that we're going to work them into the command, if they're having difficulties with the clip leash, is just going to be a little more awkward for you. Not to say you can't do it, but I think it's probably best to just keep it simple just for the beginning of training. And then once his heel's like looking good, then you can use whatever you want, because ideally he shouldn't be pulling on the leash anyways.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, you can use whatever you want. Just probably beginning of training, I would stick with the simpler clip leash and flat collar.
Okay.
And then any other questions about heel or like any leash stuff or anything like that?
Like, it's just with all of this, is he at the right age to be doing it? So like, is the adolescent phase a good time, or will he then go through another phase and we'll have to retrain them? Or is this kind of like I've heard this is when they're the worst?
Yeah. It probably is when they're the worst right now. And anytime a dog is over 6 months, they're considered an adult. Okay. So even though he is more of like a teenager right now, to other dogs, he would be considered an adult. So it's also at a point where his brain is like developed enough to be able to handle like pressure and everything like that. Okay. Because even from a young age, they're learning physicality, which is what the e-collar is introducing. It's like a physical correction. So I don't know if you may have seen it. It's a very popular YouTube video of this like mother cream retriever goes into the room with all her puppies, and they're all like annoying her like a lot, and they're like biting at her, and they're just too much. So then she nips at one of them and then just barks, and then all the dogs kind of settle down. So they're understanding that, okay, that bite is them telling me no. So we're kind of mimicking that with the e-collar, and then that's kind of similar to what like a prong collar does as well. And the benefits of the e-collar is just that we can add that in at whatever distance. So that's why we just like using it just for that extra safety. And 127 of the e-collar is never going to be as strong as like an actual dog's bite. So there's no worries there about having maybe too much physicality or anything like that. But we're basically communicating to Ricciardo in a way that he's been learning since he was a puppy, okay, that we don't want him to do something. So it's not going to be anything new to him. It's not going to be anything that he's not going to understand. And it's not something that he's going to like forget if he, for some reason, has like a personality change like in the future just from growing up. Okay. So normally what we wait for is after the 6-month mark, just because technically we can train a puppy with e-collar, but you have to be so specific with it that we don't feel comfortable trying to have other people do that, because they may run into a lot of issues and it's not going to be very easy for them. Yeah. So we just wait till after 6 months, and then we're able to do it. And then the dog's brain is developed enough to be able to understand the pressure, understand the concepts of going with the pressure. And then the only other time that we kind of witness maybe a possible change in personality is at the 1 year mark. So that's going to be separate from like any e-collar stuff. This is just any dog in general. Usually at 6 months and 1 year is when they kind of develop more of their personality. So he may just be exactly the same. He may become a little bit more outgoing, or he may just kind of like the quiet life a little bit more. Okay. But either way, the e-collar can kind of like still go through that, and he's not going to forget any training, or he's not going to completely change to where it's like, well, now we need to revisit everything, because that's like going to be separate from his like personality. Okay. Does that all make sense? Yeah. Okay. Did you have any other questions with the e-collar or anything like that specifically?
I think those were all of our questions. Yeah.
Okay. I'll add in one thing, because this is something that owners usually ask about, is like, they don't want it to harm their relationship with their dog.
Yeah.
So with the e-collar, a benefit of it is that Ricciardo never knows that you're the one making the e-collar happen. So there's no confrontation there. So if confrontation was a worry, he's just feeling the e-collar happen. He doesn't see anything like attached to you. He doesn't see you do anything. Like you're just standing there. So to him, you or your husband are not doing anything. It's just something that's like happening just out of nowhere, kind of. So
God is enforcing
this. Yeah, it's like Jesse or Enrique like to say it's just like the universe or something. Yeah. So in that way, it's very easy for any one of your family members to do it, and Ricciardo's never going to have like an issue with anybody like specifically or anything like that, because it's just a separate thing from you. And then that also makes it very easy to transfer. So let's say we're working with him, and when I use the e-collar, he's at like 35 or something. And then I give you the e-collar and you tap at 35, it's the same correction no matter what. So like, it's a lot easier to let other people like handle the dog and everything like that, because now it's like the same thing every time and it can be very consistent. Yeah. And then like, in the future too, like if whenever your child grows up and you want Ricciardo to walk with him or her, then you can let them use the e-collar, and it's the same thing. Like you don't have to be extra strong. You don't have to do anything specific. It's just the same e-collar, same command every time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a benefit of it. And then on the flip side, to have that more disciplinary presence, that's where we would give you like the videos for the bonker and explain how to kind of follow through with the commands in the home if he's not listening and the e-collar's off.
Okay. How often do you see, I guess, dogs like Ricciardo needing the disciplinary, or is the e-collar usually kind of enough?
You're saying how often do you see like yourself being like doing more of the discipline stuff separate from the e-collar?
Yeah.
It depends. It's very situational. So once we introduce the e-collar, you may see that that's enough for him. And then he's like, okay, I'm just like, he could be very mellow with it and then just go with everything and then just understand that. And you may not have to really do like any, if at all, like of the non-e-collar stuff. Or you may see that he starts to understand, I can get away with this when the e-collar is off because they're not going to like do anything. But when the e-collar is on, that's when I'm going to behave. Yeah. That's also very normal because dogs, just like humans, are very opportunistic. So if they're able to do something, they're probably going to do it. So what you can do then is, if you're consistent with using like the bonker or doing like a touch correction, and just creating that atmosphere of like, you still have to listen to me, then Ricciardo may just kind of like carry that over from the e-collar as well, to where he's just like, okay, this is the same thing whether the e-collar is on or off. I just can't do this, or this. So it could be something that is very quick and you guys don't have to do a lot, or it could be something where you'll just have to be consistent so that he understands, like, no matter if the e-collar's on or off, like the rules are the rules.
Yeah. Okay.
So it really just depends on him. I don't anticipate it being a huge issue just because I've already seen him. We all know how he is here. And usually if we need him to stop doing something after we like give like our verbal correction of like the shh and like snapping and or anything like that, he's pretty responsive to it. Okay. So well,
I'm glad he listens to you guys. I said I'm glad he listens to you guys.
Yeah, that's just because usually what happens is like here, as soon as they come in, we start off on kind of like a very like, you have to follow the rules, like you have to listen. So we almost don't create any opportunity for them to think that they're able to get away with stuff. So that's what keeps all the like being able to do the verbal corrections and everything like very clean. So that way there's no mix up, like barking or whining or anything like that is just not an option from when they come in. So then they just learn very quickly and it's really easy. So once you start adding that in, it should be pretty quick for him to understand, like, just the same way when I'm at daycare, I have to listen at home.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Does all that make sense, or do you have any other questions?
Are there any other ones like you just brought up that people usually ask that I haven't asked?
Let me think, because I think a lot of the common ones have been brought up by you, and then just that one that I added in. Another thing is, like, sometimes people ask, when do I need the e-collar on? So what we say to that, just a very simple answer of have it on whenever you need it. So we always recommend to put it on your dog once you're going outside, just because you never know what's going to happen. And it's nice to have that recall kind of ready in case you drop the leash, he pulls, maybe there's another dog, maybe something happens, anything. So even with my dog, and like I trust him and everything, but when he's going outside, I always have the e-collar on because I just don't know what's going to happen.
Okay.
And then in the home, you'll probably want to have it on more often starting out, just so you can be on top of all the behaviors to keep everything consistent. But for example, let's say you guys are just watching a movie and Ricciardo is just laying down in his bed, nothing's happening. Then in situations like that, he doesn't need to have it on. You're not reinforcing anything. He's just relaxing and it's just not necessary. Or if you see, wow, Ricciardo's really following the rules and everything, and like he's kind of gaining more like trust with everything, then you can take the e-collar off more in the home because you know that he's gonna have his manners and follow through.
So for us, it kind of seems like, so we do sleep train him, and if we're both working during the day, he's in his crate.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't need it in his crate per se, but it'd probably be more when he's out of it for us.
Yeah. So if he's in the crate and everything's fine when he's in the crate and there's no like issues or anything like that, then he can just relax in the crate with the e-collar off. Okay. And then once you take him out, if that's where you're noticing the issues, like right away he runs over to the counter. Now you know this is a time when I'm going to have the e-collar on. Okay. Or like, for example, if you have guests coming over, maybe 30 minutes before you know that they're going to be there, you'll put the e-collar on him just so that way you're ready to address anything of the jumping at the door, maybe too much excitement, any bad behaviors like that. You're just already ready to go with it. And then maybe as you're seeing him start to understand the rules with that a little bit more, then there could be a point where you just don't put the e-collar on him and he understands not to jump.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So does all that make sense?
Yeah, no, this is super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So did you have any other questions about the training specifically before we move on to kind of what type of program or anything like that would be probably most beneficial?
No, I think, the next questions were just like how many sessions and what does it look like?
Okay. So for Ricciardo, since it's pretty much obedience and he doesn't have any major behavioral issues, he is able to do pretty much any of the programs as far as daycare and train, board and train, or in person. Okay. The in person is always going to be the, I guess, like best training for you specifically. Because for the owners, for them being there, doing it in person, seeing all the issues up front and handling the dog on their own is always going to be what we would recommend. And you would still have that in-person practice with the other programs, but when you're doing the specific in-person program, that's going to be the most like direct. So for that one, I would say probably Ricciardo wouldn't need more than like 6 weeks at max. He could get away with the 3 week as well, depending on what you guys are looking for. Okay. And what that would cover is the 3 week is just 2 weeks on heel. So the first class is heel, second class is heel part 2. And then the third class would be recall. And then I believe you get to do, I think you would have to add on an in-home session to that, because I don't know if that comes with one specifically. And then the one after that, the 6 week, you can do the same thing where it's like 2 classes for heel, 1 class for recall. And then you have those 3 other sessions. You can use it in home or for any other commands that you would want.
What is, when you say recall?
Yeah.
What does that refer to?
Recall would be like come when called. So you would say like, Ricciardo, come, and then he would come over to your side and sit down.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we always include that with every one of our programs, just because it's one of, if not like the most important command to have, especially trying to have it off leash reliable, because of any emergency situation, you know that you're going to be able to have Ricciardo come back to you.
No, I love that, because I think right now if we open the door, he would never come back.
Yeah, so that's something that we include no matter what program you're going to do.
Okay.
Just because it's just always good to be able to have your dog come back to you. It's just pretty important.
Yeah, for sure.
So those the first 3 classes are like kind of mandatory of like heel and then recall, and that's going to help with the pulling. And then recall is recall, and then the next 3 classes, that's where you can decide maybe one of the classes you want Ricciardo to learn the place command, and the place command is where you tell them to go to the bed, they stay on the bed, they're not to get off until you release them.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 you want to use as in-home sessions. So one session just to kind of learn everything, and then the next session as like the follow-up to see how everything's going in the home.
Okay.
That would probably be your best bet to give you the most amount of time to like tackle everything in a nice way. So overall, I think probably the 6 week, if you're going to do in person, would be the best. And I wouldn't do more than that, because then you'll be left with extra classes that you may not need, and then you just kind of pay more for extra time that's not worth it really. And then for the in-person classes, if for some reason, let's say you do the training with Ricciardo and you do all 6 weeks and you're really happy with it, and then maybe you want to do more after that, you can always add on days. So it's better to start at like kind of what you're needing and then add on if you really want more.
Okay.
And then for the board and train or daycare and train, is that something you would be interested in as well? Or
I think if we could knock it out with the in-person, we'd probably just do it that way.
Okay. Yeah, then probably the 6 week in person would be the best bet to cover all the bases of like the basic commands. So that way you can have the walks and everything like that nice. You have the recall. You have an extra session to do an extra command if you want to work on place or down or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then you have the other 2 for your in-home to be able to take care of all the in-home stuff.
Okay. And what does that run?
That one is, let me see. All the prices for everything are on our website. Let me check.
Okay.
Pull it up really quick.
And is that really like 6 week, like 1 class a week spread out across 6 weeks? Is that how you do it?
Yes. So it'll be 1 class a week. You'll reserve a specific time slot. So let's say Monday from like 4 to 5 works for you, like every Monday. Then every Monday from 4 to 5, that's your session. And then you get 1 cancellation / reschedule.
Okay.
So that way, if you can't make it to one, it's no big deal. We'll still reserve your spot. You just would reschedule for like that class a different day.
Okay.
Okay. So the 6 week at Oz Park, since while the weather's nice, we like to do it in the park for a more realistic scenario, would be, it looks like $1,000 for the whole program. And then for the e-collar for Ricciardo, I would probably recommend, he could probably do the 280C, and you don't have to worry about remembering all of this because it'll be sent to you in an email after this.
Okay.
And that is one of the smaller collars, just because he's a smaller dog and his issues aren't really that extreme to where we will probably need more power or anything like that. So the 280C is just made for like smaller dogs like Ricciardo, and it's smaller remote, smaller receiver and everything like that. So that should be able to address everything. And I don't think that you'll need something more intensive like what we use for the bigger dogs or anything.
Okay.
And then let me write that down so I make sure.
What do the collars run?
The collars, so I think the 280C is one of the cheaper ones just because it is smaller.
Yeah.
But let me see. Either way, the collars that we use, Dogtra, are a little bit more expensive than other standard collars just because it's like a professional brand, like it's what they use for police dogs and everything like that. And we just found that it's the most rounded out for training. It's not going to be like too harsh for the dog, and it's like very reliable. So we just like to use those. Let me see. 280C. It looks like it's about $215.
Okay.
What was I gonna say? But yeah, we like to use those just because, like I said earlier, it's 127 levels. So some of the cheaper collars only go from like 1 to 10, and their 10 is the same strength as our 127, but they just don't have that extra breathing room in between to where maybe on a cheaper collar, Ricciardo is not listening when it's set to 4, but then we set it to 5, and now Ricciardo's yelping and it's too high for him.
Yeah.
Or with ours, maybe 20 is not working for him and 25 is too much, but 23 works just right. So that way we have that wiggle room in there.
Okay.
Any questions about the collar?
I don't think so.
Okay. And then I think this has like either 3/4 or a full mile range as well. So if for some reason Ricciardo ever gets loose, or if you get to a point where you're able to do some off-leash stuff with him, then you have like all that extra space. It's still going to follow through. It's waterproof. And overall, it's just like a very durable collar. All of our clients who get them have had them for a while. Usually stuff doesn't go wrong.
Would he use it then when he's with you guys for daycare?
He can, yeah. So we don't have any issues with him in the playpen necessarily. So we wouldn't need it for like that type of corrections probably. But if you send him with the e-collar, he can do duration work like the other dogs who have trained with us. So that's just the place command. But the way that we have it set up is that they go on their dog bed. We don't need to be by them, and they're just kind of practicing and relaxing all at the same time. And they do that for about an hour. And then since he's e-collar trained, he'll be able to do that and he'll understand everything. And then that's just like another thing he can do.
Okay.
Any other questions with that?
No.
Okay. And then overall, did you have any questions or concerns with everything we went over, or is there anything else that you wanted to cover?
No, this is super helpful. I think I just got to talk it through with my husband and then see what we want to do. Okay.
Sounds good. For this program, you said that you were kind of interested in the 6-week. I'll go ahead and let Tina know. She should be reaching out to you through email.
Okay.
Because she handles all of Enrique's in-person clients. And if you end up going with in-person, you'll be doing in-person with Enrique.
Okay.
And she'll be able to talk to you about any questions that you're having. She'll relay the information of what e-collar to look at and everything like that. And then she'll let you know also Enrique's availability, so that way you guys can schedule it out if that's what you end up going with.
Okay, great.
Well, if that's everything, then I'll go ahead and let you get back to motherhood and all that.
My craziness. No, thank you so much. This has been so helpful.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you guys reaching out. I'm excited for Ricciardo to get into his training.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.